Hi everybody, welcome back. Now I've had a few people over the years ask me, what would be a good car to buy or whether I could come and look at something that they're planning on buying. And I've spent years as a mechanic, so I've looked at a few different cars and worked on many different brands. And I've noticed a few different things just when it comes to looking at certain cars and what stuff to look for. Also, I've bought a few cars in my time as well. Mainly I've bought a lot of really end-of-life sort of, I guess you could call them chip boxes, but right, yeah, look, I bought those things that were basically at the end of their lifespan and just ran them into the ground because I couldn't really afford anything nicer. But over the years, I've bought nicer and nicer cars, and I'm at the point now where I sort of have okay cars other than the project one that I'm working on. We've decided to buy another one, right? So I was already writing this episode. I'd already done the scripting. I'd already done a recording. I've recorded the video about 3 times now, so this will be the 3rd time. Hopefully I'll get it right. And I've just sort of thought, well, I'm just going to go through the original script for buying a used car, the tips and the tricks, but also I'll throw in some of the experience I've had with the shopping experience over the weekend that we went and looked at these things. And we'll just go through that and I'll show you at the end what I ended up buying. Stick around and I'll show you. So starting from the beginning, you want to look at the budget and how much you want to spend. Now, you've got to take into account now that when you do insurance, you have to pay for insurance up front now. They don't do cover notes anymore apparently, so that's something to look at when you're going to buy something. You need to sort of get a rough idea on how much the insurance is going to cost for the vehicle that you're planning on buying. You're going to have a look at the different comparison websites. There's plenty of websites out there, or you might just find something on the side of the road. Generally, when I'm looking for cars, I'm looking on Facebook Marketplace or Gumtree, car sales, that sort of thing. They're a little bit more streamlined and you can actually do comparisons and they will give you, I think it's car sales will give you an idea of how much something should be going for. The market pretty much determines itself and the demand. It's gone down a bit now, seeing as people can actually buy new cars. So the used car market's calmed down a little bit, but it's still pretty crazy, in terms of having things and you're finding a good bargain, or you're finding something that's, you want, but it's actually really expensive. Anyway, that's just the way the market is right now. Now, when you are looking at ads online and you're doing your comparisons of what cars you're looking at buying and just checking the overall condition through the photos, just have them blown up as big as you can and really look at them. Because sometimes what can happen is they take the photos at an angle. If they're trying to hide damage, they'll try and take them at an angle where that damage doesn't show up. So if the car's only got, 1 or 2 photos, just proceed with a bit of caution. But if you get a lot of photos, a lot of angles, it's really good to actually see every angle of the car. You also want to be looking at things like the kilometres. If you get a photo of the odometer, that's great. Some people put them on there and some people don't. But it's really handy to check the actual kilometres instead of whatever the person's written on the ad. Now bear in mind, if the kilometres show up as being pretty suspicious for the car's age, for say like a 12-year-old car having 60,000 Ks, I would question that. When you look at the average kilometre a car will travel in a year, it's usually about 15 to 20,000 Ks. It might be a little bit less, but unless that car has basically gone to the shops once a week and back, but for some reason it's being sold by some guy who looks like he would use that car on a daily basis, it sort of makes you think, oh, okay, maybe that might be a bit sus. You're also looking for ads that are really suspicious in terms of you might have something that's really new. Like, for instance, I saw a couple that were really obviously scams. Someone was selling like a 2019 Corolla and it had about 30-odd thousand kilometres on it. And they were selling it for under 10 grand. Now, obviously, to me, that's a scam for sure. And when you look at their Facebook profile, you can see other stuff that they're selling. Someone might be selling like 3 or 4 different cars, and I'd be questioning why they're selling 3 or 4 different cars. But also, this particular person had the same ad running over and over and over again, about 3 or 4 times. Same price, same car, only 1 photo, and the number plate was blurred out. Now, I know someone would probably fall for that and go, oh, that's really cheap, and they'll probably end up having to send a deposit to be able to look at the car, and there's no car. So they'll lose their deposit, which is really, it's quite sad. But there's a lot of scams out there and you really have to be careful about what you're looking at in terms of how genuine the ad seems. If the seller seems genuine, you get a lot of people that they just might look kind of sketchy. You look at their seller profile and they're selling a couple of cars, 3 or 4, 5 cars. And it's like, why are you selling that many cars? And they all seem to be very pristine. Well, I think what's happening with there, now it's just a theory, but I reckon that anything that's been sold on any online platform like for really, really cheap, has been picked up, and then they've basically tarted it up and tried to flog it off for more money, which is okay to a point, but you get things that happen like odometer tampering, problems not being fixed properly or just being covered up, or they basically present the car really, really well and it looks really good, but when you turn up, it absolutely looks like crap. So just be aware. I mean, we did look at one, it looked really good in the photos, but when I turned up and looked at it, I walked around it once and had a closer look at it, like tyres and stuff like that and body condition, and there was a lot of stuff that wasn't actually shown up in the photos because the photos were all taken at angles that all the damage was hidden, so you couldn't see any of it, and it just looked really gross, like a lot rougher than it presented in the photos. Had filthy handprints all over the front of it that hadn't even been cleaned off. Two of the tyres looked completely, like one was completely bald, the other one was far off, and everything was different tyres on it. It really looked like somebody had just gone to the wreckers and just dragged the car out of the lot, thrown whatever parts they could find on it, and just put it out on the street, put a for sale sign on it. And again, looked okay in the photos, but as soon as we turned up, I'm just like, I'm not going to buy this thing because it looks like garbage. So if you are arranging it to look at a car and the seller wants you to leave a deposit or send them a deposit ahead of actually going to look at the car, I'd probably avoid it because it's, why do I need to leave a deposit even if I haven't looked at the car? You think about that. I want to see the car first before I'm putting money down on it, unless it's something really, really like rare or something that the owner's very particular about, that they want you to put money down to show that you're serious before even test driving the car, then that's okay. But if you haven't seen anything and they're asking for money straight up, chances are it's probably a scam, and I would probably avoid it as you're probably just going to end up losing your money. Hey everybody, just a quick interruption. Service New South Wales has updated their website and they've actually added the feature now you can check previous kilometre readings. So when you do your New South Wales rego check, which you should do before you even go and look at something, you can get the registration number off the ad if it's there. Or if you need to go to the person's house to look at the car and you can see the plate when you pull up, just put it in real quick before you get out of the car, just so you know, hey, okay, you know what you're walking into. Just this way you avoid things like, wound back odometers or even anything that lists on that as a written off condition. Sorry, my hair won't stay down. There you go. Just to check those things out before you go ahead with anything else. That way you can avoid situations like this. Okay, research. Now, you might have something in mind, like a specific brand or a specific model. You might have just whatever fits the budget. Now, it's a good idea to sort of narrow down probably about 2 or 3 choices. Do your research on them beforehand, because you want to know things like the common issues that they might have, anything that might come up with them will be online. You can just look it up. It's pretty easy. You might want to look at things like recall stickers. Is there any recalls that have been done on these things that need to be done? You want to check and make sure those things have actually been completed. And usually there's a little foil tag in the driver's door recess. So when you open the door, you can see there's like a little tag in there that has a campaign number. And that'll tell you if that particular recall has been done. We did have that Takata airbag scandal a few years ago where a lot of cars got recalled due to the fact that they had faulty airbags. And you want to also make sure that if that vehicle was affected, whether that airbag has been replaced. You also want to do some more research on what these cars actually look like, just so when you get there and you can look at it and go, oh, that looks right. Everything looks as per the photos on like Google or whatever. And just the basic things like your toolkit and your spare tyre and the jack. It's important to know where the spare tyre and toolkit is because you only need them in emergencies. And when you actually do need them, you want to make sure they're actually there and they work. Now, you've booked an inspection with the seller and you're looking at the car and you're just walking around checking out the external condition. And you just want to check on things like external damage. You might see a few scratches and dents, and I mean that to me that's not a big deal breaker, but some people are very particular about that, and it'll be very hard to find a used car that doesn't have some slight imperfections. So you're checking for damage, you're checking if anything looks out of whack with the panel gaps, and usually you can sort of tell if it doesn't look quite right. Something doesn't look like it fits properly, or something looks like the panel gaps are too loose or too tight. You're looking at the paint condition as well. You get a lot of cars that are, especially older ones, that have the clear coat starting to peel off, or you might notice that a couple of panels look slightly different than the others. And usually that's more prominent with metallics. Metallic paint, if it's not blended properly, if it's been repaired, tends to show up because it's not actually been blended in properly, so it doesn't look uniform. So those two panels that have been fixed or replaced or whatever and resprayed, but it hasn't been blended in, so it just sticks out. Not necessarily a red flag or anything, but when you're looking at it, that's obviously a sign that it's had some kind of damage, and you might want to make further inquiries about that and check around the area and make sure that there's no other damage that hasn't been fixed properly and is just been covered up with a new panel and they've just sprayed over it and left it like that. You also want to look at things like the tyres. Now you're looking for the way they've worn, whether they've worn uniformly or whether they've worn on the edges or in the middle, and their condition. If you're looking at an old tyre and you're seeing a lot of like weird little cracks around the edge of the tread, usually it's where they're most prominent. It means those tyres are really, really old and they probably should be replaced because they're actually already starting to break down. Now that you've done your external inspection, you want to go and have a look at the interior. And you just want to check all of the functions of everything. Check the function of the radio, the air conditioning, the lights, you might have another person with you, or you most likely will have another person with you, and you can get them to check the lights with you and make sure that they're all working properly. And anything that you can get your hands on, just have a fiddle with it and see how it works. If you're looking at also the condition of the interior, you want to look at any odd staining, and there's still a few out there floating around that have had flood damage and people are still trying to flog them off. There's usually a couple of signs of that. You might see traces of mud in weird places, or you might see weird staining on the interior. You might also see things like if you were to look in areas where all the brackets that hold all of the componentry together, like the dashboard, if you're poking your head up under there and you see all the brackets are really, really rusty for some reason. Generally, they shouldn't be. If the car's really, really old, yeah, maybe. But anything that's, within the last 10 to 15 years, if the brackets are like really, really rusty, I would be very concerned about that because chances are it's been underwater. And it also causes electrical issues as well if water's gotten into the electric. So you don't really want that kind of problem to manifest. And while you're in the interior, you may as well look for the service booklet. Usually you'll find that in the glove box. If it's not in there, you could ask the seller if they have the service records or the service booklets, and then you get an idea of what the servicing's like on the vehicle and how it's been maintained. Now, you'll generally find that servicing is never done 100% on time. So if all the service records look like, it's at 100,000, it's had its 100,000 service on exactly 100,000 Ks, or it's had any service on exactly the Ks specified, it's a bit sus. A spotty service history, look, if you're judging the condition of the car and it seems like it's in good shape, it looks like it's been looked after, it's just had the occasional service missed, it's not a huge deal. As long as the overall condition at the point that you're looking at it, it looks good and everything seems to be functioning as it's meant to be functioning. Also, while you're looking at the interior, look at the boot, pop the boot, check the boot release works. Go and have a look at the boot, look around, see if the toolkit, the spare, the jack, they're all in the boot where they're meant to be. And because you've got to lift up the carpet anyway, you're checking the condition of the floor of the boot, checking, make sure there's no signs of any rear impact damage, and you'll see it because the boot will look really rumpled at the very, very back towards the trunk opening. And you're also looking for traces of water ingress into the wheel well. See if water's been leaking into the wheel well. Again, could be a sign that it had flood damage, or it could be a sign that the boot seal might be leaking. Now, if that water builds up over time, it'll end up rusting out the boot well, but that's a long period of time. But if you catch it when it's just starting, it's not a big deal, you can get it sorted out, but just be wary of it. Now you've done your external inspection, you've done your internal inspection, everything looking good so far. Now we get to the mechanical inspection. This is the point where I would say if you are planning on having someone to inspect it, whether it be a mobile mechanic, NRMA, or you're taking it to a mechanic, probably let them deal with it if you're not feeling confident. Make sure somebody else who knows what they're looking at can check it. If you feel confident, go ahead, that's fine. But the things you want to look out for when you open the bonnet, you're just looking for damage around the front of the vehicle. Anything from the front chassis rails, from the opening of the bonnet across to the radiator support, you just want to see if there's any signs of damage or kinking around there. And you just want to look for anything that looks broken or damaged in the engine bay. There might be a few clips missing, there might be a few rusty bolts here and there, and I'd be looking at that a bit further if I'm seeing stuff that's not looking quite right. chances are you've done your Google search, so you already know what the engine compartment of this particular vehicle you're looking at might actually look like, and you can see straight away there might be something missing or there might be something damaged, and you can make your own decision whether you want to proceed with the inspection after that. But you also want to see how the engine runs. How does it sound while it's running? Does it sound really good? Does it sound like it's making any weird noises? If you are doing like a running test and you're just doing like accelerating the motor a little bit and you're hearing a weird clacking noise coming from somewhere in the engine, that's never a good sign. Could be a multitude of things. Could be big end bearings, could be top end making a bit of noise. When you're looking at the engine bay, you would expect it to be a bit dirty unless the seller's had it detailed. It does get dirty in the normal operation of things, which is, it's perfectly fine, perfectly honest. And you're basically looking at things like, you're just looking for leaks. Checking around the radiator hoses and looking for any kind of colourful crust is usually a good sign that there's a coolant leak. Checking around just the engine to see if there's any leaks forming at the top of the engine doesn't usually happen. Usually if there's any leaks, it'll be underneath. And anything that you can look at, you're looking at the condition of the belts. You might, while you're looking at the condition of the dry belts, you might be looking at the condition of, say, the water pump and see if there's any leak coming from that. Usually if the water pump is leaking, that's a sign that it is in fact failed, then you should be changing that. When you're looking at your belts, and you're looking for signs of fraying, but you're also looking for signs of parts of the ribs missing, that means that belt needs to be changed. And if you've checked everything, you've checked the engine oil, pull the dipstick out. Now, does the oil look clean or does it look dirty? Not necessarily worried about it. If it looks dirty, probably just needs an oil change. But if it looks like it's really grey and murky, could be a sign that water's getting into the oil. Coolant leak, which means it could have a blown head gasket or a cracked head or something like that, and you just would probably want to avoid that because it's very costly repair. But don't ever remove the radiator cap, and the reason I say that is if the vehicle is at operating temperature and you take the radiator cap off, it's close to 100 degrees, and as soon as you take that off, if there's anything going on and it's really hot, that coolant will spurt right out, and it'll spurt all over you and it'll burn you. Sorry, just another quick edit. While you're looking at the engine bay, you want to check for your chassis number or your vehicle identification number. So that can be in a multitude of places. I would Google that first so you know where to look for it. Could be on the firewall at the back of the engine compartment. It could be on the chassis rail if it's a body-on-frame vehicle. Or even, I know the vehicle that I've got, it has a little tag on the floor, a little plastic plate with vehicle body number on it. And you pop that plastic plate off and the VIN is under there. So check that as well, and if you can, check the engine number and check those particular numbers against the registration papers to make sure that they all match up. It may have a different engine, and that means it has a different engine number, so just ask why that is. Sometimes it happens, an engine blows up and it has a different engine number. You just want to make sure that the engine's not like a stolen engine that's been thrown in or something like that. But otherwise, just check those things out while you're at poking around in the engine bay, Good luck. Right, now you've done top end of the engine compartment. Now what we're going to do, we're going to look underneath. This might be hard if they've got the plastic cover underneath. Usually a lot of cars have a plastic splash guard underneath the car. That's going to stop you from being able to look at things properly. Now if you see anything that looks like a really bad oil leak, if the engine's covered with oil completely, there's just so much of it around you can't tell where it's actually leaking from, that's probably not the best thing you want. You want something that's sort of like, if it is leaking, you can actually see where that leak's coming from, so you can determine for yourself whether you want to go ahead with that. A little bit of oil seepage here and there, you can sort of see a little bit of a trace, but if it's starting to drip, that's when it starts becoming a problem. If you're seeing leaks from the gearbox, or you're seeing a leak from between the engine and the gearbox but nowhere else, could be a sign that the rear main seal is actually leaking, and that's an expensive job because that means the transmission has to come out, and if it's manual, it may have to replace the clutch as well if the oil has somehow made its way onto the clutch disc, and that will cause slipping issues and grabbing issues with the clutch. So if you're someone who's going to do this stuff yourself, you can determine for yourself whether it's worth the effort or not. Now, when you're looking underneath as well, you want to look for any traces of leaks from either the brakes, the shocks. If it's a front-wheel drive car or all-wheel drive car, you'll have CV boots. So you just want to check the condition of those and see if there's any leaks or any tears. Usually a grease leak from a CV boot will be traces of grease splattered around the rotating area of the CV joints. And also just the overall condition of things like the bushings, all the suspension components that you can see, and also engine mounts. Things can look cracked. All rubber bushings will actually crack at some stage, but it's determining how cracked they are. If they've cracked the whole way through, like the center versus the outside is completely cracked and it's sort of holding in there. A lot of these bushes are designed so that the rubber component, it's an insulator, but the way that the mount's actually designed, it's sort of captive. So if the rubber does fail, that part's not just going to drop out. You can tell straight away. If you jacked up the car and looked underneath it, wiggled the wheel and stuff, you could see that. Do not use a scissor jack and then get under the car. Always make sure that there is a stand or something that is supporting the car if you have to jack it up to get underneath it. Always be very, very safety conscious when you're getting under a car. And don't rely on the jack to actually hold the car up for you and it be safe. Because if the jack were to fail and you've got 1.5 tons coming down on you, it's not going to be very good. You could, get severely injured or even killed if you were to do it. So be very, very careful when you're looking under a car. If you can't get under a car and you don't feel confident jacking it up, get it inspected by a mechanic. Now, you should be asking questions of the seller. If you see anything that's sus, ask some questions about that. Ask some questions like why are they selling it. They might even tell you without asking, might be like they're selling it for their son. Their son doesn't need their car anymore, or they've outgrown it, or just anything like that. You always just want to know reasons as to why. You also want to know things like, is it registered? Is it insured? Because you're about to take it for a test drive and you want to make sure that the insurance is valid and the rego is actually current. And if you're happy with the condition of the car, then we're going to go for a test drive. So just try and don't have the radio on or anything. You just want to drive around and just really get an idea for how it's driving. If there's anything that seems out of the ordinary, you might notice a weird clunk in the steering, you might notice clunks from the suspension, you might notice weird noises from the engine, or if you have a chance, you can check and see if there's any weird amounts of smoke and anything weird coming out of the tailpipe. Chances are if the engine's not doing so good, it might have a lot of smoke coming out of the exhaust. Depends also because some diesels have a DPF, and if it's doing a burn-off while you're doing a test drive, and you've got a lot of black smoke coming out of the back of the car, you might think, oh, no, there's something wrong with this. But it was just actually doing a burn-off. But that's only really for diesels. If the car's blowing a lot of blue or black smoke as you're driving along, chances are there's something going on with the engine that hasn't presented itself when you've looked at it. You want to check the condition when you're turning. If it's a front-wheel drive car or an all-wheel drive car, and you've looked at the drive shafts but they look good, but you're noticing a really rough clacking noise when you're turning, chances are that's got something to do with the drive shafts being worn out and then making noise. If you're, say, noticing a vibration through the brakes while you're braking and it gets worse as you brake harder, that would be brake rotors. They're warped, basically, and would need machining or replacing. You also want to check how it drives in a straight line. With the wheel alignment, you should be able to hold the wheel straight and the vehicle drive straight. If you're holding the wheel straight and the vehicle's veering off to the left or to the right, there's chances are there's something wrong with the wheel alignment. Or if you have to hold the wheel at a weird angle to be able to drive straight, there's something going on with that. But if you're on your test drive and you notice that everything looks good and everything's driving smoothly, the car feels smooth, there's no weird noises, there's no weird knocks, and there's no weird vibrations or anything like that, you could take a chance now to pull over somewhere and just have another look at the car and just having another look at its overall condition and anything that you may have missed when you initially did the inspection. You want to make sure that you're happy with it, so look at it as much as you have to feel comfortable to buy it. If you may have felt uncomfortable while the seller was there, then you could look at it. That's provided that the owner of the car hasn't come with you for the test drive. Sometimes they will come with you. Other times they'll be like, yeah, no worries, off you go. Go for a drive around the block or whatever. Right, now you've come back from your test drive and you are ready to make a deal. You're happy with the car, happy with the way it presents and the way it drives and everything. So what's the first thing you would do before making an offer? If you're serious about the car, you want to do a revs check and just check and make sure that everything that the seller has told you and what you noticed about the vehicle is true and accurate. A revs check will give you an idea if there's any finance owing on the car. It might alert you to any signs of odometer tampering, because usually whenever you go and get a pink slip done, the mechanic's supposed to be writing down the mileage of the car that's meant to be going into the system for that car. So that's where Revs gets that information. They get it from Service New South Wales through their database, and if there's any sign that the last registered kilometres was this, but somehow it's now less, then they will alert you to say, hey, look, there's detection of odometer tampering. If the car has been in an accident and say it has been written off, This might actually come up when you do a Service New South Wales rego check, where you just go onto the Service New South Wales and put in the rego number, and it comes up, and it might come up as a condition as a written off vehicle. And that way you would look at this before you even go and look at the car. If the rego number is available, you could put that in. Now, we checked a couple like that, and a few of them came back with written off condition, even though the car looked good. It was mainly just because of hail damage. They had hail damage on the roof, but they had been written off because of it. If it's been through insurance, that's where the information comes from. It only comes from if it's been through insurance and been repaired through insurance. If, say, the vehicle had been in an accident and should have been written off, but someone's bought it and instead of it being put through insurance as a repair, they've then repaired it themselves and are selling it off, that's not going to show up. So that's why inspection is very important. If there's been any damage, it's not going to show up on a revs check. And say your revs check comes up clean and you're ready to make an offer. The seller might be very firm on the price. By all means, if you're happy with it, go ahead. You could ask them honestly, hey, look, if I bring you cash, what will you take for this car today if I'm going to buy it right now? And they might be a bit more negotiable on the price. They might give you a decent offer. And you can counter that with a slightly lower offer, and sort of you come to somewhere in the middle and you negotiate. But always be courteous when you're doing this. Also, when you're talking to the seller, you sort of want to give them an impression, okay, well, I've looked at a few other cars and I'm looking at cars around this certain budget, and that sort of gives them an idea in the back of their mind, hey, okay, this person is probably going to offer somewhere close to that amount. So they know already in advance that, hey, you're probably going to try to negotiate down a little bit, and so that they might be a bit more inclined to work with you. If not, you can either decide to move on to another one, or you can buy the one you are looking at. Don't really discuss how much cash you actually have on you or how much money you're actually willing to spend. Now, if you've agreed on a price and you need a minute, some people can get a bit overwhelmed with the process, and sometimes you need a bit of time to decompress and you want to walk away for a little bit. You may have the cash on you already, but this is a good time to think about everything that you've gone through in that whole process and see whether it's something by the end of that process you should still see whether you want it or whether you don't. If anything that you sort of think about after the fact pops up and you're like, oh, actually, I'm not really that keen on it for whatever reason, then you just politely let the seller know, hey, I'm not coming back. I've changed my mind, and move on to the next choice that you have. Or otherwise, you've had a bit of a time to think about it and you go back and you do the deal. Or sometimes you might have the seller is telling you, hey, I've got other people coming to look at this car and they've already offered X amount of dollars. Now, that could be a genuine offer. It could be a bluff offer. You don't know. But if you think it might be a bit of a bluff, you'd be like, oh, okay, no worries. Well, I'm offering this price. Just consider it. I'm going to go off and have another look at this other car that I'm looking at. And if the seller doesn't show up, my offer stands and you can just let me know. I can come back and pick it up. I'm interested in the car, but not at that price. Okay, so everything has gone well. You've done your inspection, you've done your checks, you've done your revs check, you've made your deal, you've paid your money, and you've got the keys in your hot little hand. Congratulations, you've done it. Now, what's the first thing we do before we go anywhere? That's right, you've got to get insurance. If you've gotten a quote from your insurer beforehand, good time to ring them and say, hey, look, I've bought this car, I got a quote for this much. And you'll have to pay for your policy straight away just to make sure that it's valid. And you want to do this before you do anything else, before you go anywhere, because you're no longer covered by the seller's insurance. And if you have an accident, you're going to be in a bit of trouble. Now, registration, you've done your paperwork. Now, they'll probably submit an online notice of disposal, which means you've got 2 weeks to transfer the registration, otherwise there are extra fees. Now, you should be able to look at that on your Service New South Wales dashboard if you look at your Service New South Wales account, if you have one. And that way you don't even have to go into a Service New South Wales office and you can just do it online. If they haven't done the notice of disposal online, then yeah, you will have to go into Service New South Wales to do the registration transfer. But with all that done, so I hope these tips help you in finding your next used car. Be aware and be safe and make sure you check. Now, I'm going to show you what I bought.
So we bought a Mazda 2. It's a 2012 model automatic. I mainly got this because my daughter is learning to drive, and we do have a manual, but she's not quite ready to do manual just yet, and we're just going to let her get used to driving in this. And a lot of the times also my wife has the manual car and it's usually off somewhere. It's very hard for me to get time to actually have the car to get her to drive. I've also picked up a new job, so I need something small and reliable to sort of get me to work, and parking's not great around the office, so I actually, it's really handy to have a smaller car than park the big Kluger that I'm normally driving. So this will come in handy for the next 6 months at least, and then my daughter will probably end up driving this and I'll have to go car shopping again. And in the meantime, I'm sort of hoping that we can sell the Kluger that we have, and I will probably buy, I was hoping to buy a Hilux, but as I mentioned, the prices are ridiculous at the moment, so I just don't think that's going to happen. So, but I'll keep looking. Anyway, I'll tell you a bit about this thing. It's actually pretty good. It's just got a few small issues, a weird noise coming from the brakes, which I suspect is something to do with the drums, and also a minor clunk in the steering column. Apparently it's a common issue for these cars, and it could be a simple fix, or it could be a case of me replacing the intermediate shaft between the steering column and the steering rack. It's not that big a job, it just requires a bit of patience, and you've got to disconnect the shaft and then put it all back together and hope that you've got the alignment of it all right, so that you don't have to go into a wheel alignment. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'm going to get home before this rain gets too bad. Catch you in the next one.